They claimed mastery of war, these glittering, ancient entities that spanned the star lanes. They spoke of sophisticated doctrine, of calculated attrition, of fleets that moved with the precision of celestial mechanics. They saw themselves as the apex predators of the cosmos, honed by millennia of conflict. And they saw Earth, and the nascent alliance of soul, as little more than a footnote. A bustling, chaotic, embarrassingly emotional collection of species crammed onto a single, fragile world and its immediate orbital sphere. They were tolerated, sometimes traded with, occasionally amused by. They were never, not for an instant, considered a threat. Earth pleaded for inclusion, for understanding. They spoke of cooperation, of shared progress. They extended tentative hands across the vastness. The galaxy, in its ancient wisdom and deep-seated arrogance, mostly ignored them. Or worse, it patronized them. Humanity, in particular, with its bewildering speed of change, its capacity for both great kindness and terrifying cruelty, its inconvenient insistence on concepts like rights and autonomy for all its diverse peoples, was deemed unstable. Unreliable. A variable best kept at arm's length, perhaps exploited for its raw materials or specific, niche skills, but certainly never allowed into the inner sanctums of power. Warnings were issued. Quiet diplomatic cables about resource disputes on distant colony worlds, about the unfair weighting of trade agreements, about the casual disregard for sovereign space. These were met with silence, or curt dismissals. The Galactic Union, a sprawling, complacent bureaucracy of elder races, saw no need to listen to the noise from the relative galactic backwater that was the Sol system. They had protocols. They had procedures. They had power, ancient and seemingly unassailable. The concerns of a single, upstart species were beneath their notice. Then came the lesson. The Union world of Xylar needed bioluminescent minerals found in abundance on Cygnus X-17, a system just outside the Alliance's claimed sphere of influence, but one where humanity had established a thriving, if small, research colony and several terraforming hubs. Diplomatic talk stalled. Earth cited prior claim, signed treaties, the lives of its colonists. The Union cited galactic necessity, resource allocation efficiency, and failure of lesser species to utilize assets optimally. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, and utterly devoid of empathy. Earth refused to yield its people. The Union fleet arrived not as negotiators, but as enforcers. 30 warships, sleek and ancient, materialized above Cygnus X-17. There was no ultimatum. There was no final demand for surrender. There was only the cold, hard logic of a power that saw an obstacle and removed it. The orbital platforms were vaporized in moments. The terraforming hubs were glassed from orbit, oceans boiling, atmospheres burning. The research colony, home to 50,000 souls, received no hails, no warnings. The Union flagship, the Celestia Prima, simply opened its primary batteries. The surface boiled. Buildings crumbled into dust. Life ceased. The Union broadcast the event across the sector, a stark, brutal demonstration. A lesson to any others who might think to impede the Union's will. They claimed mastery of war, and this, they declared, was its flawless execution. Efficient. Absolute. The silence that followed the destruction was deemed a testament to their power. One ship survived. A battered, civilian long-haul freighter, the Star Wanderer, caught on the system's outer edge, masked by a nebular cloud during the initial attack. Its crew of 20 watched the sky melt, watched their homes become pyres, listened to the dying screams over the comms before the networks went dead. They watched the Union fleet depart, leaving behind only silence and ruin. Among the survivors was Captain Eva Rostova, her face etched with the flickering reflections of distant, burning worlds, her eyes holding the raw, unspeakable horror of 50,000 deaths. The Star Wanderer, damaged but operational, turned its back on the graveyard and began the long, silent journey home. It carried no cargo, only ghosts and a single, burning memory. The news hit Earth not as a state broadcast, but as a whisper from the void. The Star Wanderer's emergency beacon, broadcasting a corrupted data stream, a fragmented recording of the Celestia Prima's cold declaration of intent and the subsequent screams. Grief washed over humanity first. A wave so profound it seemed to silence the very winds. Mourning flags flew on every continent, orbital habitat, lunar base. Funerals were held for ash and memory. The initial reaction was shock, disbelief. How could a civilized galactic power do this? How could they massacre 50,000 civilians for minerals? Then came the silence. Not the silence of submission, but the quiet, seething absence of sound that precedes an act of immense, focused will. The politicians, the corporations, the disparate nations and factions that had once defined humanity dissolved into a single, unified entity. Not through decree or conquest, but through a shared, unbearable trauma. Borders became irrelevant. Old grudges faded into insignificance. All that mattered was the memory of Cygnus X-17, the echo of the screams, the image of the Celestia Prima's indifferent guns. From the ashes of grief rose an icy, terrible rage. Not the hot, wild fury that burns itself out, but a cold, crystalline resolve that settled deep in the bones of the species. They had been given a lesson. Now, they would learn. And they would teach. The vow was silent, unspoken in committee rooms, but etched into the heart of every human. Never again. Never would they be so weak, so vulnerable, so easily dismissed. Never again would their lives be considered expendable, their homes rendered into dust by distant, uncaring hands. Earth pulled inward. Diplomacy with the Union ceased. Trade routes that had taken centuries to establish were abandoned overnight. The alliance of soul became a black box. Sensors probing the system found only automated warning beacons and a chilling silence. The galaxy assumed humanity was broken, retreating into itself, licking its wounds. The Union declared the lesson a success. Cygnus X-17 was already being strip-mined, the minerals flowing towards Xylar. Life, the galaxy believed, had returned to normal. But within the Sol system, there was no normal. There was only work. Furious, unrelenting, silent work. Scientists were pulled from theoretical physics and redirected to weaponization. Engineers repurposed interstellar mining drones into automated fabrication plants. Shipyards, once building freighters and habitat modules, began constructing vessels the likes of which the galaxy had never conceived. Decades of disparate research, often dismissed as too dangerous, too theoretical, too weird, were unearthed from forgotten archives. The black vaults were opened. Theories of spatial manipulation, of energy states beyond conventional understanding, of consciousness interfaces with technology, dismissed by the staid, conservative science of the elder races, were given unrestricted funding and a singular, grim purpose. Human society transformed. The arts turned dark and reflective, focusing on loss and grim determination. Education was streamlined, prioritizing technical skills, strategic thinking, and physical conditioning. Population growth was encouraged, every new life seen as a future builder, a future defender. The emotional energy that the galaxy had once found so bewildering was channeled, focused, hardened into an unbreakable collective will. Captain Rostova, the lone witness, became a silent, iconic figure, her testimony replayed countless times, her face a constant reminder of the cost of weakness. She was given command of the first new vessel launched from the orbital yards, a ship that was not built for exploration or trade, but for a single, terrible purpose. A ship christened, simply, the Memory. Years passed. 15 years. A blink of an eye for the ancient races of the Union, who measured progress in centuries. For humanity, it was an age of accelerated evolution, driven by trauma and a singular, burning goal. The galaxy had forgotten Cygnus X-17. Or perhaps, it simply chose not to remember. They were about to be reminded. The first sign was not an armada emerging from hyperspace. It was a ripple. A distortion in the fabric of spacetime detected by remote Union listening posts guarding the sector where Cygnus X-17 lay, now a busy mining zone. It was dismissed as a localized anomaly, perhaps residual energy from the lesson. Then, the ripple intensified, folding space in a way no known drive could achieve. A single ship materialized above the primary Union processing station orbiting Cygnus X-17. Not hyperspace translation. Something else. The station's sensors flared, identifying it as human, but unlike any human vessel ever catalogued. It was stark, angular, built of materials that absorbed rather than reflected light, appearing as a void against the stars. It had no visible weapons in the conventional sense. This was the memory. A voice broadcast on all Union frequencies. Not a human voice, but a synthesis, cold and clear, carrying the echoes of 50,000 lost souls. Union Vessel Identification, Processing Station Gamma, 7. You occupy space drenched in the blood of the innocent. Your continued presence is a trespass. Station Command, after moments of stunned silence, responded with arrogance. Unidentified human vessel, you are in restricted Union space. State your intentions or be destroyed. Your species was given a lesson 15 years ago. Do you require another? The synthesized voice replied, we learned the lesson. Now, we apply it. There was no visual flare, no energy beam. The memory simply engaged. A field, unseen and silent, expanded from the ship. The processing station, kilometers of metal and life support, didn't explode. It simply ceased to be. Not disintegrated. Not vaporized. It was unmade. Its atoms seemed to unravel, its very structure ceasing to hold coherence. It folded inward, collapsing into a point of non-existence, leaving behind not a debris field, but an empty space where it had been milliseconds before. The mining fleet nearby, witnessing this impossible event, panicked. Hails to Union Command went unanswered, the communications network across the sector suddenly dead. Then, the rest of the human fleet arrived. Not from hyperspace points, but seemingly everywhere at once. Not a single, vulnerable formation, but distributed, layered across the system. Hundreds of ships like the memory, and larger vessels, vast and terrifying in their silent aspect. They didn't deploy fighters. They didn't launch volleys of missiles. They simply moved, surrounding the Union mining fleet and its remaining escort vessels. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than an hour. The Union ships, designed for conventional warfare, were helpless. Their shields buckled against unseen energies. Their weapons' fire dissipated or was simply absorbed. The human ships didn't destroy them with overt force. They were disabled. Their power cores phased out of reality. Their weapon systems twisted into useless scrap. Their crews found their minds assailed by a silent, crippling dread, a psychic resonance of the trauma that had forged the human fleet. The message was clear, delivered not just by destruction, but by a psychological echo. This was not war as the Union knew it. This was consequence. The survivors of the mining fleet, adrift and powerless, could only watch as the human fleet turned its attention to the surface of Cygnus X-17. The processing centers built atop the graveyard were not destroyed. Instead, the human ships deployed silent, atmospheric processors that began to reverse the damage of 15 years prior. The poisoned seas were purified. The burnt atmosphere was replenished with oxygen and nitrogen. The scarred land began to heal, not over centuries, but days, hours. It was a chilling display of power, restoring what had been so casually taken, a stark reminder of the life that had been eradicated there. The message was sent, carried by the few crippled Union ships allowed to limp away. Earth was back. And they remembered. The galaxy was gripped by a sudden, profound silence. The arrogant laughter ceased. The dismissive whispers died. In their place was a cold, creeping fear. The Union, slow to react, sent scouting fleets to the Cygnus sector. They found only the regenerating planet and the eerie absence of the human fleet, which had vanished as silently as it arrived. No trace. No wake. Only the chilling perfection of their single, devastating strike and the impossible act of restorative power. The human campaign began not with a declaration of war, but with a systematic dismantling. The Union command hub on Xylar was the next target. Not the planet itself, but the orbiting command structure, an ancient, heavily defended battle station. The human fleet arrived not in a mass, but appeared sequentially, ships phase-shifting into existence within the station's own defensive perimeter, bypassing all external defenses. The battle was internal, a terrifying, close-quarters slaughter aboard the battle station as human boarding parties, clad in void-black armor and armed with plasma-edged blades and phase rifles, moved through the corridors. These were not conventional soldiers. They were specialists, hardened and trained in the silent period, operating with chilling efficiency and a singular focus. They did not take prisoners. They did not parley. Their mission was simple: decapitation. The battle station's command staff were executed in their own war room. Data cores were purged or extracted. Then, the human ships phased out again, leaving behind a drifting hulk filled with dead. The message was brutal and personal. The architects of the lesson were being targeted directly. This was the pattern that followed. Key Union logistical hubs vanished. Communication relays collapsed. Not through brute force, but precise, surgical application of their reality-bending technology. A fleet massing at a strategic jump point would find its drive cores simply wink out of existence, leaving them stranded. A fortified world would wake to find its orbital defenses disabled, its planetary shield generators phased through solid rock and deactivated from within by unseen infiltrators. Psychological warfare became a key weapon. On systems that had cheered the lesson, fragmented data streams would suddenly appear on public networks, recordings of the screams from Cygnus X-17, overlaid with the cold, synthesized voice of the memory. You watched. You cheered. You forgot. We remember uprisings, long suppressed by Union rule, flared across the galaxy, emboldened by the sight of the seemingly invincible Union crumbling. Worlds that had once scorned humanity now whispered their name with a mixture of terror and dawning hope. The Union High Command, decentralized and panicked, proved incapable of mounting a coherent response. Their ancient strategies were useless against an enemy that didn't fight according to the rules of physics as they understood them. Their ships were outmaneuvered by vessels that didn't rely on conventional engines or tactics. Their secure communications were breached by methods they couldn't even detect. Fear, a concept the Union had only ever inflicted, now gnawed at their core. Their arrogance had been replaced by a desperate, flailing scramble. As the campaign escalated, humanity revealed deeper layers of their power. On one world, a Union stronghold that resisted ferociously, refusing to surrender even as their defenses fell, the human fleet deployed something new. Not destruction, but transformation. An energy field enveloped the planet, and its very geography began to subtly shift. Mountains moved, oceans drained, continents reformed into shapes eerily similar to the landmasses of Earth, scaled to the planet's size. It was a chilling demonstration. They could not only destroy, but reshape reality itself. The Union forces on the planet, watching their world literally remake itself around them, surrendered en masse, broken not by violence, but by a profound, existential terror. What were these humans? What had the lesson created? Even as they systematically dismantled the Union, there was a chilling restraint. Cities were rarely targeted, unless they housed critical military command. Civilian populations were often ignored, left to witness the collapse of their protectors. The goal was not genocide, but the utter annihilation of the Union's power structure and, more importantly, its authority. They were teaching a new lesson: underestimation had consequences, and some wounds would not heal until justice, or something colder, had been served. The galaxy learned that human patience was long, their memory absolute, and their unleashed power a force of nature. They weren't just fighting a war, they were orchestrating an unraveling. The Union, facing total collapse, turned to desperate measures. Their scientists spoke of forbidden technologies, ancient artifacts sealed away for millennia, deemed too dangerous to use. One such project was the Sentinel, a colossal weapon platform built around a captured singularity, capable, they claimed, of unraveling fleets and boiling suns. It resided in the heart of Union space, a last, terrible gamble. Messages were broadcast across the galaxy, pleas for aid, for allies. Worlds that had suffered under Union rule largely ignored them. The fear of human retribution outweighed the fear of Union collapse. Internal factions within the Union, seeing the end, turned on each other, scrambling for power or attempting to cut deals with the silent, advancing human fleet. Cohesion crumbled from within. Admiral Rostova, her face now a mask of grim resolve, stood on the bridge of the memory. The campaign had taken its toll. Not in losses, which were negligible for the human fleet, but in the cold weight of the actions taken. The systematic dismantling, the psychological pressure, the sheer scale of the power they had unleashed. "Report on Sentinel readiness," she said, her voice raspy. Her second-in-command, Commander Harrow, a veteran who had lost his family on Cygnus X-17, replied, "Union reports indicate full power activation within standard cycles. They believe it's their final deterrent. Their salvation. They believe it will stop us," Rostova stated, not a question. "They cannot comprehend what we are," Harrow replied, his tone flat. "Their understanding of reality is limited. They built a cage. We learned to walk between the bars." The human fleet did not assault the Sentinel directly. Instead, they phased into the system in a non-threatening formation, arrayed around the weapon platform at a distance considered safe by Union doctrine. The Sentinel's primary weapon charged, a terrible vortex of energy building at its maw. Union command hailed. Their leader, High Counselor Valoris, his face gaunt with fear, appeared on the view screen. "Human commander. Stand down. We have the Sentinel. Any further advance will result in the annihilation of your fleet. Turn back, and we can discuss terms." Admiral Rostova looked at the High Counselor, her expression unreadable. "Terms?" she said, her voice low. "You offered no terms at Cygnus X-17. You offered a lesson. We learned it. But this is madness." Valoris stammered. "You cannot withstand the Sentinel. Its power is absolute." Rostova didn't raise her voice. "You claimed mastery of war. You claimed absolute power. You were mistaken." The Sentinel fired. A colossal beam of chaotic energy lanced out towards the human fleet. It struck the void black hulls. And nothing happened. The energy seemed to flow around the ships, harmlessly dissipating into subspace. The human ships remained, silent and utterly untouched. A ripple passed through the human fleet, emanating from the memory. A single pulse, undetectable by Union sensors. High Counselor Valoris cried out on the view screen as the lights flickered in his command center. The Sentinel, kilometers in size, the culmination of Union-forbidden science, simply shut down. Its singularity core did not detonate, it was neutralized, stabilized, its power source simply turned off by something external, incomprehensible. Admiral Rostova leaned forward. "You did not understand the forces you wielded," she said to the terrified Valoris. "We do. That knowledge came at a terrible cost." She paused, her gaze piercing. "The Union is dissolved. Your reign of arrogance is over." The human fleet made no move to destroy the crippled Sentinel or the Union capital world below. They simply held their position, a silent, ominous presence. The galaxy watched, stunned. The Union, the power that had dominated the star lanes for millennia, had been dismantled not by a rival empire, but by the species they had casually brutalized. The fall was complete. The old order was dead. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The Union was broken. Its fleets were scattered, crippled, or vanished. Its leadership was dead or in hiding. And humanity, the underestimated, the dismissed, now stood as the preeminent power. Not through conquest of territory, but through the sheer, terrifying demonstration of their capabilities and their implacable will. A new, fragile status quo settled over the star lanes. Fear was the primary currency. Worlds that had once lorded over humanity now sent urgent, terrified diplomatic overtures to the Sol system, which were often met with polite, chilling silence. Trade routes shifted, orbits changed, alliances fractured and reformed in the shadow of human power. Humanity didn't establish an empire in the traditional sense. They didn't demand tribute or occupy systems en masse. Their dominance was more subtle, more psychological. They were the silent, watchful arbiters. The ones who remembered. The victory, absolute as it was, came with its own heavy burden. Within the human collective, the initial unity forged in shared trauma began to show cracks. The cost had been immense, measured not just in the 50,000 lives lost at Cygnus X-17, but in the hardening of the human heart, the acceleration of their science down terrifying paths, the weight of the power they now possessed. Factions emerged. Some argued for continued expansion, for ensuring no other power could ever rise to threaten them again, advocating for a preemptive dominance that bordered on the very arrogance they had fought. Others argued for isolation, for a return to Sol, sealing themselves off from a galaxy they no longer trusted. A significant voice, often embodied by figures like Commander Harrow, questioned the morality of their methods, the fine line they had walked between justice and vengeance, the fear they had instilled. Had they become like their oppressors? Or worse? Admiral Rostova, now revered and feared in equal measure, carried the heaviest burden. She had been the instrument of their vengeance, the embodiment of their collective rage. But the memory of Cygnus X-17 was a constant companion, a reminder of the innocence lost and the terrible cost of reclaiming it. She had given the orders that unmade fleets and reshaped worlds. The power was theirs, but the purpose, once so clear, sometimes seemed to blur. What was the ultimate goal? Survival? Vengeance? Or something else entirely? New dangers inevitably arose in the vacuum left by the Union. Remnants of the old order, fanatics clinging to a dead ideology, plotted in the shadows. Other species, inspired by humanity's revolt, but lacking their restraint, began their own brutal wars of liberation, sometimes invoking the name of humanity, warping their message into a call for indiscriminate violence. The galaxy was destabilized, and humanity was now responsible for its precarious balance, whether they wanted to be or not. The era that dawned was not one of peace, but of profound quiet. The star lanes were less busy, the ancient, arrogant empires humbled or shattered. Humanity remained, a silent, powerful presence. Their fleets were rarely seen, but their potential was never forgotten. They didn't rule the galaxy, but the galaxy now lived by a simple, unspoken rule: do not provoke Earth. Do not underestimate humanity. Admiral Rostova's final public address, years after the fall of the Union, was short. Standing before a memorial wall etched with 50,000 names, she looked not at the cameras broadcasting her image across the now watchful galaxy, but at the wall itself. "We were taught a lesson," she said, her voice weary but clear. "We learned. We survived. We remembered." She turned back to the cameras, her gaze sweeping across the vast, unknown expanse of space they had now irrevocably changed. "We do not seek dominion. We seek only that the price of forgetting is understood. That the cost of innocent life is remembered." She paused, a long, heavy silence stretching across the systems. "You do not need us to lead you," she concluded. "You do not need us to govern you. You need only to not forget why we came." The silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. The human fleet remained, vigilant. The galaxy watched, fearful. The cycle of violence had been broken, but the forces unleashed remained. The lesson had been delivered. The memory was absolute. And the future, in the quiet, watchful gaze of a species that had learned the true mastery of war through suffering, was profoundly uncertain. The cost of power was paid not only by the vanquished, but by the victor, who carried the indelible mark of what they had endured and what they had become. They claimed mastery of war. Humanity demonstrated its consequence. The galaxy would never underestimate them again.